What is up, best friends, and welcome back to the Modern Nest Masterclass. I'm your host, Darren, the owner and proud broker in charge of Modern Nest Realty, located in downtown Concord, North Carolina. And today we're going to be talking all about leasing a residential space, what to look out for, what that looks like, and an experience that I had leasing a space, okay? So get excited, get into it. My disclaimer, as always, I am a realtor, but I am not your realtor. You never want to share your personal, private, confidential information, guys, with anyone unless you are planning on working with that person or that agency exclusively, okay? Now, Modern Nest Realty does offer exclusive tenant representation to people who are looking to lease a residential space in our area. And as always, you can book an appointment with one of our firm's agents at modernnestrealtygroup.com. So, diving right in, friends, I have to tell you, here in North Carolina, there is no rental cap or rental control policy, right? So, landlords, property owners in North Carolina, they can charge whatever they want to for rent for a property, right? But you have to understand that all things in real estate are typically negotiable, right, between whoever the two parties are. When it comes to the security deposits for a residential lease, guys, they are going to be in correlation to that rental amount. Right. So, and there's a couple of different ways that this can look. Right. So, if you are on a week to week tenancy, and I typically don't see that a lot, but I know it can exist out there. If you're on a week to week tenancy, the security deposit for that, guys, is going to be 2 weeks rent. Right. If you were on a month to month tenancy, so if you were working not on a lease here in North Carolina, you were going to typically fall under month to month. Then that is going to be the maximum is 1.5 months rent for that security deposit. And then if you were on greater than month to month, if you were on a yearly lease or anything different than that, the maximum they can charge is 2 months of that rent. Now, they can always charge you less security deposit if they want to, right? They don't have to charge you the maximum, but those are the maximums in those situations. When it comes to a security deposit refund, friends, now that security deposit is going to be held by the landlord, by the property owner, whomever. And then once the tenant moves out, they're going to investigate the property and they're going to see if there's a ton of damage, anything like that. Now, they cannot deduct from the tenant security deposit reasonable, normal wear and tear items. Okay, I'm not going to get huge into that because I don't personally practice property management. But I know that like a little bit of high traffic carpet, some little scuffs on the wall here and there, minor normal lived in things are okay. Now, if you bust out windows, break things, things are missing, there are liens on the property due to your tenancy, stuff like that, then that could take some of that security deposit, right? Now, that security deposit, the landlord or property owner, they have to account for those funds, right? And what those funds were used for if anything is deducted, right? So the landlord must provide in writing, guys, an itemized accounting for any damage deductions and any maintenance or anything that had to be done major to the property that had to come from the tenant security deposit. They had to provide that in writing to the tenant within 30 days, at least a preliminary. Now, I think they have up to 60 days to give a final accounting for whatever they had to deduct from the tenant security deposit. But at the 30-day mark, you should at least have a preliminary accounting from the landlord, from the property owner, whomever, for what's going on for the damages or deductions from that security deposit. It's super important, guys, that you take photos of the property before you move in so that you have a record and you have proof with date and time stamps of what properties look like when you take ownership of them, right? So if there are items that are damaged or whatever, you want to make sure you have evidence of that and have stuff in writing. Now, I can only speak for us at our office. We do that with the client when we walk through with you so that we can have a record of that and help you negotiate those repairs and make sure it's all in writing and done properly. Some basic requirements that you want to keep in mind when you are going to through going to lease a space is that the application fees, guys, you're typically going to pay those after you've done the property showing and you know that you want to apply for that rental. So most, when I say most, that's going to be most properties listed with a property management company. That's what I mean, right? So most require credit and background checks. Right, they are going to require 3 months rent and income. They are not going to want you to have aggressive dog breeds per se, and they're typically going to require you to have a renter's insurance policy, and that's not a huge deal. It's not a huge expense, but it gives you coverage to all your personal property in that lease space, okay? So those things you also want to keep in mind. If you are working with a professional, guys, let them know that and they can help you find properties that will negotiate with that, right? So if you don't necessarily meet the income requirements for a certain period of time, or you have 13 cats or whatever it is, make sure you let your agent know so that they can help you in that regard, right? Because lease terms are negotiable, right? Another great thing about having an agent represent you guys when you are a tenant is it's going to help eliminate your chances of falling prey to a rental scam, right? We see it all the time where people try to rent a property that's advertised on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or what have you, and it's kind of like a cash for key situation. That person is not the real owner, and they really want to get you to give them cash or give them a security deposit for these alleged keys to a property, right? And the people who typically fall prey to this the most are people from out of town who are not necessarily familiar with a new area. So that's really important. You want to make sure that you work with somebody local who can help, suss things out for you. It's always a great idea to ask for identification, guys, and have a record of that. They usually want to see yours when you are applying for stuff. So it's always great to verify who owns the property, and you can always double check who owns the property on your county's GIS website. Or go to call the Register of Deeds or whomever and just verify. If they are an out of town or out of country owner, you're going to put yourself at risk if they're not personally local here to be accountable, right? So a lot of disputes and stuff in the rental situations, they are going to be featured out at the small claims court if they are under $10,000, right? So that is going to be how that works out. But that is another reason why you want to work with a professional. Guys, you never want to give deposit money, application money, stuff like that to a stranger or somebody off the street. You want to make sure that it's correct. And another thing that I want to share with you guys, this is totally random, but I do a lot of advocacy for victims of domestic violence, and a big question that comes up a lot is, can I get the landlord or the property owner to change the locks of a residence or allow me to do it? So I'm just going to read with you a little bit of this answer from a website that you can find through the Google. This is in reference to the North Carolina General Statute 4242, Section 3A through C. But your landlord has to either change the locks, within 48 hours or 72 hours, depending on whether the abuser is a tenant in the home or not. Okay, so you get permission to change the locks yourself, right? However, whether the landlord does it or not, you are responsible for the expense of changing those locks. There are different procedures that you have to follow to change the locks depending on whether the perpetrator, the abuser, is a tenant in the same household or not. Also, if you live in an apartment building that has a main entry door shared by many tenants, the landlord is only required to change the lock to your apartment, not the main door of the property, okay? If the perpetrator is not a tenant in the same residence as you, you may give verbal or written notice to the landlord that you are a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking, and may request that the locks be changed, okay? So you are not required not required to provide documentation of abuse to the landlord. The landlord must change the locks or give you permission to change the locks within 48 hours of receiving the request from you, okay? If the perpetrator now, guys, is a tenant in the same residence as you, so they are on the lease, they are a tenant, they're living there with you, then you may give verbal or written notice to the landlord that you are a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking and may request that the locks be changed. However, there must be a court order that orders the abuser to stay away from the residence, and you must provide a copy of this order to the landlord if they are a tenant in the residence, guys. So the order can be a protective order, a criminal judgment, a pretrial release order, or any other order that says the abuser has to stay away from the home. The landlord must change the locks or give you permission to change the locks within 72 hours. Note, even if the perpetrator is removed from the home, he or she can still be held responsible by the landlord for rent or for any damage caused to the residence. If the landlord does not change the locks within 48 hours or 72 hours required by law, you can change the locks to your residence without the landlord's permission. However, guys, hold on. However, if you change the locks, you must give a key for the new locks to the landlord within 48 hours of the locks being changed. Now, I know everybody's going to roast me. I'm not an advocate for changing the locks, on the residences that you don't own, but that is what you can find from the Google. Again, my disclaimer is Modern Nest Realty. We do not give legal advice, but this is just something that you could Google if you find yourself in that situation. Then you do have the right to change those keys, and there is a proper procedure and way to do that that's protected. I understand that a lot of people in those situations don't always have the time or ability to go the proper route, but that is the proper route if you were wondering. And there are other protections for you by law in regards to breaking leases and stuff like that, in effect to domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. And there are protections for you if the landlord is trying to discriminate against you or anything like that in regards to that. So always, do your own homework, do your own research, but that's just a little tidbit on that. Another thing that I want to share with you guys is that the lead-based paint requirement still is required for rental homes. Anything built before 1978 could have the possibility of lead-based paint in the home, and that can be a health hazard, guys, and it is most dangerous for children and kids that could eat the paint. This is just what I've heard. Allegedly, it tastes like sugar and it's sweet, and it can definitely have health effects on people. So definitely consult that brochure and check it out when you're renting a property. So if you have any questions, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope it was a great little tidbit. I wanted to share with you here at the end some of my personal experiences leasing a property. So I've leased properties in the past. So I have had the same commercial landlord for almost 8 years, right? Shout out to John McCrimmon's in downtown Concord. You cannot find a better commercial landlord if you 3D printed it from AI or whatever, how you do it. John McCrimmon's is hands down the best landlord. I'm on my second space from him, and just could not ask for a better landlord. Have never had a horrible or any complaints with him whatsoever. So it pays to do business with good people, y'all, and it pays to ask questions and to ask for references and to just do your homework and do your due diligence. But I've always been a proud tenant of John McCrimmon's. And on the residential side, there have been periods of time where I've had a residential rental just like everybody else, y'all. And one time in my life, I had a residential rental. This was after I had a real estate license, so I knew a thing or two about a thing or two, right? And on move out of this residential rental, there in the lease, I was supposed to have the home professionally cleaned, have the carpets professionally cleaned, right? Cool. It was in the lease. I knew about it. I did it. Upon moving out, the stove in the rental got put in one of those automatic clean features. I want to say it was by the cleaning person, and it got locked, and it like would not open, could not do anything to it, and it was like jammed or something, like it happened. So I reached out to the property management company to let them know, hey, this just happened. And y'all, they tried to tell me it was my fault. I had to pay for it, and it was my responsibility to get a repair person out there. And I had to remind them that I had a North Carolina real estate license, and I was not going to be doing that. And I was, as a tenant, I was not required to do that. And if they wanted me to do that, they need to have their property manager or their broker in charge reach out to me. And let me tell you what I did not do. I did not have anybody come out there to do that, okay? So you have to know your rights as a tenant, guys. If a item is functioning when you get it, then it needs to stay functioning. If repairs need to be done, you need to notify your property manager in a timely manner, and you need to always have your documentation and read your lease, guys, because leases can look different. There are standard forms, what we typically deal with, and then there are customized forms, right? So customized forms could have lots of different provisions, lots of different stipulations and stuff like that. So it's really hard to broad brush anything in real estate altogether, right? So you always want to look at what the specific terms are and, check that out before you find yourself in a situation. But leasing a property is something that typically everybody goes through, right? And you want to know what your rights are, but you want to make a plan to purchase a home. Now, another topic that people ask about sometimes is a rent to own or a lease purchase. And we're going to touch on this here, and then I'm going to let you fly. But a lease purchase or a rent to own situation essentially is a contract where you have the right as a tenant to buy the house or buy the property, whatever it is, at a certain date, at a certain price, right? You are not required, you just have that right to do that, right? And not every property owner, number one, wants to sell their property. Some want to hold it as a rental and receive that cash flow, okay? So that is a different contract that, excuse me, has to be negotiated with the seller or with the property owner, and that is not a standard form, okay? So that is something completely different that can be an option for you, especially if it is a property that's been on the market for a while and the owner is in a situation where they are really considering liquidating and selling it. So again, guys, everything is negotiable, and you don't get the answers to questions you don't ask, okay? So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions about residential rentals, you know where to find us, and we will see you next time.